Welcome to Watch the Bookerman and to the final sort of wrap-up video for this series. I'm just going to take a look through as many of the screens as I can, probably ramble on for a little bit long, and hopefully I can edit this down into something that's watchable. I will again try and put chapters into this video so that if there's anything you're particularly interested in, you don't have to go through the whole thing. You can find the specifics that you're interested in. Of course, Slammiversary 10, we're just off the back of that. I haven't processed or advanced any further days. This is literally the first time that I've opened the save since booking that show, although I have had a little look around just to see if any interesting quirks came up that I could particularly point out. We see the results for the show. It was far from the best event that we've ever put on, but I think maybe a good place to start is looking at our top 100s. We will begin, of course, with our top 100 events. The first being an episode of Impact Wrestling from December 2011, which was main evented by what we will see on our top 100 matches, one of the best matches we have ever done. We also had the big face-off between CM Punk and AJ Styles, as well as Paul Heyman announcing that he was stepping down. But you can even see on that show we had some not that good stuff. Eric Young and Consequences Creed didn't that often make it onto Impact Wrestling, or TNA Impact as it was then, so a little bit surprising there. A few good matches as well. A big segment with El Generico and Kevin Steen there, so lots of great stuff on that show. Hopefully the majority of the top 10 is pay-per-views. 10 10 10, probably my favourite show in the series, I have to say. The debut of the new AEW, aside from the three big signings, are kind of the jewel in the crown of this save, in my opinion. The incredible main event, our best match up to that point, and the only match that could potentially have been better than that Chris Daniels, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe three-way from Unbreakable back in 2007. We had some really great matches on there as well. I can't exactly go through absolutely everything, but I am thinking I'll put the save as well somewhere in the description so you can actually look at the history of the save rather than just seeing the database as the land laid at the end. We also had a fantastic No Surrender in 2011 that had our first CM Punk versus Kurt Angle match, but absolutely fantastic again from top to bottom. And I'd love to go in depth on absolutely everything, but there really isn't the time. AJ Styles, Bryan and CM Punk, the third or fourth, I think, best match we ever did. I will go into the matches now, however, but you can see the top 10. Another show I was very, very fond of. Final Resolution, the final battle in 2011. We had a brilliant main event, an iconic match, I'd say, in the history of TNA, as it were. We also had El Generico defeat Kevin Steen for the X Division Championship, having brought an end to their long storied rivalry, and the last time that Austin Aries and Tyler Black would be on the same side as each other before going their separate ways. So you can see again all these stories, or a lot of these stories, are long-term things coming back together. We'll go from the top 20, I'll say here, just because it does thankfully include Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle. Now, to me, in terms of the spectacle of that match, it's probably one of the biggest matches we ever put on, but I can understand that Brock Lesnar isn't quite on that level due to the rustiness and everything we saw on Slammiversary 10. But AJ Styles is in there, CM Punk's all over the show as well, as is the star of this save as far as I'm concerned, Kurt Angle. It is surprising that he's not in the top match, actually. We had the 199 rated match, never quite reached 100 in anything other than a couple of segments. CM Punk, Bryan Danielson and Desmond Wolfe in a ladder match on the first ever Impact Wrestling show, so it was all downhill from there. But Bryan and Desmond also in our third best match against the American Wolves at the Genesis pay-per-view. But AJ Styles, CM Punk and Kurt Angle, I would say, probably Bryan Danielson as well, dominate that top 20, and it really does just highlight what we have put together. It's nice to see that even a match like CM Punk with Frankie Kazarian, which would probably be pretty average in terms of a CM Punk match, it was the first televised match that he'd had in the company, so the fact that we were able to build the crowd up and make that a special thing is really good. I'm not going to go through all the 100, I'm just interested to see what is in 100. AJ Styles and Kurt Angle versus Desmond Wolfe and Samoa Joe from a random September episode of TNA Impact. But I was also checking if any of the women's matches we'd done may have made the top 100. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like they have, but it is just fun to see the random matches. El Generico v Paul London, stuff that I really wish would have happened in real life. I probably did on the indies, but I mean in terms of making it to a big stage. Some absolutely brilliant matches in there, of course. Our top 100 attendances, unfortunately, it is not Impact Wrestling Slammiversary, but the pay-per-view we did in April, the debut of Brock Lesnar, that show main evented by CM Punk and Jeff Hardy. But for the actual shows that Brock Lesnar was competing on, we do get our second and third now, where we went from the start of the save being the Impact Zone to selling thousands upon thousands of tickets. We certainly are not complaining about that. As we pointed out, the Slammiversary 10 pay-per-view was the first one in a couple of years to knock Against All Odds 2010 off the top spot. Our TV viewership rating is dominated by the last few months, and we did say that the Brock Lesnar arrival may or may not have impacted those ratings, but towards the end of the save, we're having over 3 million viewers watching the show every week, so certainly very, very happy with that. We'll also look at the size of the company. I'm not quite sure what size we're at the start, but even within the last 12 months, we have come on leaps and bounds. So the company growing and growing and growing. I think we started in second place, and I think we still will be in second place in terms of the promotions in the world. I'll sort them by size, and you can see we are second, Dragon Gate third, All Japan fourth, and New Japan fifth. This was one of the things that really interested me that I spotted. They are in debt, as are the biggest company in Mexico, CMLL, and in fact, I would have had the option here. Now, I don't think I would have ever done it because it would have been too much to actually work through, but we could have took over New Japan Pro Wrestling. We could have actually taken over CMLL, so anybody who wants the save and wants to do that, well, there's your opportunity to create a global conglomeration that could potentially, within a few years, knock the WWE off the top spot. So definitely a good reason to download the save file. And I have to admit, it does kind of make me wish that I could have carried on this save. We didn't ever start a Hall of Fame, so I will now look at what we do have in the company, and I'm going to start with the titles. We crowned the first Evolve World Champion at Slammiversary, and it was Sarita who won that title. And I will say now, this was the beginning of a heel turn for Sarita. We booked her so that she stole the victory from Rosita. She'd also failed to help her friend Taylor Wilde a couple of weeks before the pay-per-view, so we were laying seeds there for what would eventually have seen her go heel. We also had the Evolve Wrestling Champion, D'Angelo De Niro, and the intention originally was for him to drop the title at Slammiversary 10, and then he would, as he did, enter the gauntlet for the gold, looking towards the Impact World Championship, and that would have been the start of him going back onto Impact Wrestling. Of course, he came back after I think it was 14-month absence from injury when Abyss took him out. We referenced that on the pay-per-view, of course, but we wanted to do more with him, but he had that ring rust and he had sort of lost a step, to be fair, so we built him back up on Evolve Wrestling. He has that notch to his belt, his first ever singles championship. Did he ever hold? I don't even think he held one in WWE, did he? So yeah, the first championship, according to this anyway, in his career. So coming back better than ever. The plan that I have in mind, there was a few different names. I thought even about Samoa Joe, Austin Aries, but I think I landed on the most likely person to take the belt from him would have been Brody Lee, and coming off his defeat with AJ Styles, we would have then continued to build him up and trying to get him up to the 60s. He's in like the mid 40s at the minute, so we were still trying to build up Brody Lee despite him losing decisively to AJ Styles, and that would have freed up D'Angelo De Niro. Roderick Strong was a consideration to take the belt, but I didn't want somebody who is a mid-carder on Impact Wrestling running around with the Evolve Wrestling title. I felt like that could potentially hurt the prestige of the belt, so we decided not to do that, but I'm still not 100% sure on that decision, and I think I would have given it even more thought if, again, there was intention to continue the save. I will just point out that that's a pretty solid lineage, I'd say, of guys who were good, but we wanted to take to that next level. Jay Lethal, I kind of soured on him towards the last couple of months of the save, but it was a great run for him, and Desmond Wolfe winning the title in the King of the Mountain in 2011. So a nice little supplementary title. And I will say, while we're on the topic of Evolve, the plan was eventually to do a brand split on the show, and it would have been Impact Wrestling, the A show, Evolve Wrestling, a sort of B show, but still up there with a very strong roster. And it would have been the case that after Bound for Glory, we would have done that brand split, and I probably would have had somebody on the Bound for Glory show defeat Brody Lee and try and make a big face to be the front and center of that brand. I'm not quite sure who that would have been, but when I go through the roster, it might click with me who I could have gone for there. We ended with Hamada as the Knockouts champion. Now, we gave her a very, very strong push from the start. It was a fresh start for everybody, January 2012, and Hamada was basically the strongest, but I think she's beat pretty much every woman on the roster, and I have to say, she never really got over. She's a limited character in general, but I thought the idea of her just beating the shit out of everybody, it would be really cool. I wonder if I did waste Gail Kim losing the belt there on that. We could have made Hamada and Mickie James a secondary storyline then, where Hamada was just picking the bones of a downed Mickie James, and then Gail Kim could have lost the title to Awesome Kong, and we could have done a version of the Kong Hamada alliance that I began with Awesome Kong as the champion. But I wanted to give Hamada that big moment. Gail Kim, the previous champion, she won it from Tara. Mickie James, Sarah Del Rey, Awesome Kong, Madison Rayne, and Tara won it in January from our first champion, ODB. Now, that was somebody who I felt we could have done a lot more with, or should have done a lot better with. ODB, she could have been a really interesting part of the division, but she just, over the years, or the first 2 years, found herself falling further and further down the totem pole. But I think that when you look at that as a lineage, and I'll say this for all of them, maybe it's my biased opinion, but we've protected championships really, really well. Even transitional reigns like Madison Rayne, I feel, were justifiable because, for example, she was quite lucky in winning it in a ladder match, so there was always a justification for the title changes. Now, we began the save with Sarita and Taylor Wilde as the champions. We copied what they did in real life by putting the belts on Awesome Kong and Hamada. They then lost it to the New Age in a very, very big moment at Slammiversary. It was then a big moment at Bound for Glory for Mickie James and Tara to win it. Then in Angelina Love and Velvet Sky, another duo who I probably should have booked better, but again, the type of characters where, because they're so angle heavy, you kind of feel like you can have them lose and they can kind of build themselves back up by just being their bitchy characters that they were. That, of course, led to Mickie James and Tara having their blood feud that kind of permeated through the rest of the series. We then had the situation where it was Double Kong taking the belts from the Beautiful People, and unfortunately Rosita had to take the spot before Alyssa Flash and Sarah Del Rey at Lockdown. So it's interesting to note there that it was always a major pay-per-view that we changed the titles on. It was that very first episode where Kong and Hamada won it, then at Slammiversary, then Bound for Glory, then Lockdown, then Bound for Glory, then Lockdown again. Alyssa Flash and Sarah Del Rey weren't set to lose the titles anytime soon, but would it have been Bound for Glory by the time we'd have done that? I certainly had ideas for Gail Kim and Mickie James, or Hamada and Awesome Kong to win the belts and to build into the storyline that we were doing, the top storyline in the Knockouts division, which would have been Hamada and Kong v Gail Kim and Mickie James. The Impact World Championship was won by CM Punk in 2011 when he merged the TNA and Impact Wrestling World Championships. He lost it to Jeff Hardy, who then lost it to Brock Lesnar. Now, I look at that and there is one thing in the back of my mind, and that is that CM Punk, Jeff Hardy, Brock Lesnar, what do they have in common? All former WWE champions, so maybe that's a little bit of a black mark against the title there. But the person who I had in mind to beat Brock Lesnar, it's difficult. There was AJ Styles as a potential, there was Samoa Joe, probably wouldn't have beat him, but he was a potential. Kurt Angle, I don't think so. Maybe I think AJ Styles or Bryan Danielson might have been our two most likely people to take the belt off him, but I was thinking about a long reign for Brock Lesnar, so it wasn't something that I necessarily had huge future plans for. And if you thought the rating for the Slammiversary main event was poor, I had penciled in Brock Lesnar versus Sting as the Bound for Glory main event, so make of that what you will. That could have gone one of two ways. Now we have, I think, a fantastic lineage with the Impact World Championship there. The American Wolves, the best tag team in the world, Danielson and Desmond Wolfe, who actually, I didn't note that after I've gone through these, I will show you on the news screen. They won the Tag Team of the Year so far. We're halfway through 2012, so we got a little update on the TEW.com front page, and that was them. But then we had the El Generico and Kevin Steen, the most unlikely of victories for them, as they simultaneously pulled down the belts, and the story, of course, would have then been their difficulty to get along. Another thing that I think would have been a cool storyline to book, we were going to have Paul London bring Brian Kendrick back, who had missed a lot of action due to injury, and we let his contract expire while he was injured. Maybe not the best practice, but he would have come back, and then would have had the Hooligans against Generico and Steen. But yeah, another really interesting storyline that I would have loved to book, but unfortunately we didn't get the chance to. The X Division title is another one that I'm really happy with the lineage of. We didn't really showcase it that well until October 2010, We had Amazing Red lose it to Kazarian, who then lost it to Roderick Strong, who then lost it to Jay Lethal. So there you can look at it a bit more of a mid-card title, but then Kazuchika Okada with Larry Sweeney kind of rekindled interest in the division, I felt, as did Roderick Strong, before losing it to what I think is a fantastic sequence of champions: Tyler Black, El Generico, Kevin Steen, El Generico, and then Charlie Haas took it for more storyline reasons or to take the division in a slightly different direction. But Shelton Benjamin then won it at Slammiversary, and I think that he would have done fantastic things. I have in my mind like Shelton Benjamin doing what Seth Rollins did with the IC title, and more famously John Cena did with the US title, a little bit of a open challenge situation, and we would have probably put him in action pretty much every week and seen what he got to do. We had the Bound for Glory Tag Team Series in 2011 won by Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin. We never did anything with the Pure Championship, but the World Heavyweight Championship of Ring of Honor started with Austin Aries before AJ Styles won it from him at Slammiversary, only to lose it to CM Punk. And of course that was part of the major Ring of Honor versus TNA story that we did. Again, the titles were on Adam Pearce and Joey Ryan, I think, when I bought the company out, so we quickly got it onto ANX, who were the only team that we had on the roster at the time. Because of Ring of Honor's money troubles, they'd even released the likes of, I think, Eddie Edwards and Mark Briscoe. We put it then on the Briscoes at the anniversary show, the 9th anniversary show of Ring of Honor as it was. The American Wolves won it because, like CM Punk, they too unified the Ring of Honor and TNA championships. The Super X Cup was won by Kota Ibushi, who went on to face El Generico at Destination X. We retired the Global Championship. I do think we at times missed the secondary championship, but it was Abyss beating Eric Young to take it from him. Eric Young, who we buried more than pretty much anybody else in this save. Jay Lethal and then Abyss taking it back before laying it down to earn a shot at the World Championship, and that was the last we saw of that. The TNA World Championship began in the hands of AJ Styles, only for Kurt Angle to defeat him at Lockdown in what was probably the most memorable title reign of the save. An absolutely incredible run from Kurt Angle, the longest reigning champion of any title in TNA history, before he lost it to, hopefully making a star, Bryan Danielson. He then would go on to lose the belt just a few months later as part again of the Ring of Honor TNA storyline. AJ Styles, who had just lost the Ring of Honor Championship the night before, defending TNA from CM Punk in that triple threat, which was without doubt one of the best matches we ever did. Luckily he did that, only for that unification match at Final Resolution to see him drop the belt. Now, the tag team division is something that I loved to toot the horn of time and time again, and this was one of the things where I actually deviated from reality at the beginning, because I had Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin win the belts at Final Resolution 2009 before Paul Heyman even came in. The reason I did that is because I wanted that as soon as you tuned in to the 2010 version of Paul Heyman's TNA, we have these two cool, interesting characters, and I always thought that Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley had that coolness vibe to them. They did lose the belt to a heel Beer Money, who invoked their Feast or Five that James Storm had previously won, before Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin won them back, only to lose them to the Kings of Wrestling, who lost them to the Icon and the Enigma. David Richards and Eddie Edwards were then the final holders of that championship. We also held a World X Cup in 2011, which was won by Team USA, led by Roderick Strong with the Young Bucks, and it was interesting, I thought, how they all came back together. It wasn't an intentional reunion of the Team USA team, it just so happened that I ended up putting them all in the same stable, and that's why I did a few references towards that at the end of the save. But they defeated the Kazuchika Okada-led Team Japan. Now, we will look in the creative meeting and see that the top 5 is, I suppose, the top 3, you'd say without question. Of course, you want Brock Lesnar to be in there, but CM Punk, absolutely incredible from coming in the company. He was only here for a year, but some of the most memorable moments in the save are because of CM Punk. Kurt Angle, my star of the show. Nobody came even close to him at 43. It was the young, hungry, aggressive movement, and his storyline, if you remember back in January 2010, was that Paul Heyman seemed to be wanting to shove him out the door. Of course, that was all a ruse. Actually, what he wanted was to bring out this Kurt Angle, and we saw that there is nobody on the planet who can even come close to Kurt Angle when he's on form. Jeff Hardy, of course, wildly popular, still wildly popular despite his squash defeat at Slammiversary 10. Bryan Danielson, clearly we made a star out of that man, and as you saw in real life in WWE, there was no way that Bryan Danielson wasn't ever going to be a star. Davey Richards is a bit of a strange one, but that's just, I think, a testament to how fantastic he is in the ring and the fact that he has been very, very solidly booked. I'm only looking because, of course, it's strange to see him as one of our top main eventers, but 23 wins, 1 draw and 11 losses. That's one of the better win-loss ratios of anybody in the company. Now, will we look into the future of this save? We'd be seeing that Jay Lethal, who he's kind of been part of the company for so long that it's weird to see him considered still a youngster and a upcomer, but he's number 5, with the Briscoes taking 3rd and 4th. Surprisingly, Mark, the one with the higher potential, it seems. Roderick Strong and Matt Jackson, 2 members of the same stable there. Nick Jackson, unfortunately, not quite making the cut, but I'm sure he's not too far behind those 2 guys, and it's the same 5, albeit in a slightly different order for the hot prospects. But it's great to see that the future of this company was very, very bright. We're talking about Jay Lethal as a veteran here. He's 27 years old in 2012. All 5 guys I should say on this 27 or 28 years old. So again, the future of the company was very, very bright. The talk is pretty much as you'd expect, albeit Jeff Hardy, not the best promo guy of all time, but I understand where it's coming from, taking into account his start quality and his charisma and everything like that. The showstoppers, Samoa Joe's probably the one there who was booked the worst. I'm interested again to see his win-loss record throughout the time of the save. It's probably not as good as you'd hope. It's still solid, it's still positive, but he took a lot of losses because of basically storyline reasons. I think he probably took less pins than it looks like there, but Chris Hero, absolutely fantastic. Somebody who, because of what happened in reality, I was very keen to try and make a focal point. And of course, I think he would have been a future single star of this save, perhaps even more so than Claudio Castagnoli. Now, Tyler Black, another guy who was always going to become a star, but Chris Hero, I think, had everything, and I think in this timeline, he would have been given every opportunity to reach the top of the card. I can imagine him in main event matches against any of these guys. Of course, he's probably shared the ring with all of them, apart from CM Punk, I think. Kurt Angle is, of course, I mean, I'm surprised he's number 3. Perhaps an indication that he was slightly on the decline towards the end of the save. Now, we never saw that in terms of his performances, but it might have been the case that he was starting to slow down, or am I just making that up? Yeah, he's stayed pretty consistent, to be fair, over the last year at least, but he's not quite at the level of CM Punk and AJ Styles, 2 guys who really, really don't like each other, but ultimately coexisted to make some of the greatest matches in company history. Bryan Danielson is a ring general, knocking Chris Hero out of that top 5, but again, it's a case that I think they would probably have been 6 or 7 in the respective lists that they missed out on. Who's hot? Beer Money are hot. I think they are the 2 guys who are really underpushed, or I think overlooked is the word I'm looking for here, but they must have had pretty good win-loss ratios for them to be so hot, or maybe it's just that the fans hate my booking of them that much that they are absolutely desperate to see what they would have done, and every time they're on screen, they've got this potential that I'm just not putting out there. They wrestled about 50 matches throughout the course of the save, so yeah, again, perhaps somebody who I could have done a lot more with. 2.5 years, 50 matches, that's not that good. Hamada, it's good to see, and Kong, to be fair, that even though her ratings weren't getting that much better, it's good to see that Hamada's push did at least have some effect, and she did have some good momentum there. Davey Richards, again, people wanted to see Davey Richards. Maybe I should have been checking this more often throughout the save and basing booking decisions off this. I did have in my mind that Davey already, or both of them, could turn on Austin Aries on the Impact Wrestling after Slammiversary, so maybe it would have been time to turn the insanely popular Davey Richards, that major star, into a babyface and had him feud against Austin Aries, and then maybe see which way Eddie Edwards goes. Who's not is only Sting. Well, sorry about that. He's an icon of the company and the only person with enough negative momentum to be in the Who's Not list. Pretty terrible on my behalf that I've just said that he was the guy I was positioning for a main event position at Bound for Glory. And, well, it looks like he wouldn't have been that. Speaking of the Bound for Glory pay-per-view, it would have been a Bound for Glory series this year, taking into account that Brock Lesnar isn't going to be appearing on every pay-per-view going forward. We're going to use him in that limited schedule based around what he'd worked in WWE. Essentially, I'd look how many matches he did in 2012 and try and work it so that he did that many matches in 2012 for us, and then going forward it would have been the same, trying to keep a little bit of realism in there for Brock Lesnar. Now, the Hidden Gems, I don't really have any intention of signing any of them, whether the save would have gone on or not, but that's a little bit disappointing to see. We didn't ever have a figurehead, and our stables, we will show you at the end, we had Fortune, who were absolutely booked into oblivion by us. I named these Mount Rushmore of wrestling, but I never called it that on screen, but it was just Kevin Steen, the Young Bucks, and Roderick Strong were all in versions of Mount Rushmore of wrestling in PWG. We then have Team Canada, who I always wanted to look for who could be that focal point to give us a bit of momentum for them, but to be fair, they just do a jobber stable, and essentially they're a tag team. It's just that I never made them inactive after the pay-per-view. The New Age of Honor, actually, I need to make inactive because they are no longer a stable after what happened at Slammiversary, and there is the Brotherhood, the New Age Originals. I'm going to make them inactive as well. So we only had 3 stables during the end of the save, but throughout the years we did have some other ones. We had Anderson's Assholes, we had Bad Influence when it also contained Matt Morgan and Madison Rain, LAX, which featured those people you can see on screen. We had a Ring of Honor stable, we had Sweet and Sour, which never really recovered from losing some of the bigger names, and Team Japan, all the teams from the World X Cup. Of course, Lacey Von Erich came and went. The British Invasion, never used any of these. The Psych Ward I certainly didn't book, and the World Elite were pretty much made inactive as soon as the save started because it just wasn't a stable that I felt had any forward momentum. We did have a good tag team division towards the end of the save though, or throughout the save, but particularly towards the end, and there are many great tag teams there on display. Really happy with what we did in the tag team division, even if it didn't quite reach the top heights, and we have plenty of teams there who I'd say are future World Tag Team Champions. The Young Bucks, you'd have to say, hopefully getting the belts eventually, and the Briscoes too. And of course, the story that I had in mind was for Bound for Glory, the Briscoes to take the belts off Kevin Steen and El Generico. I did also at times have thoughts of bringing Ring of Honor back, and I think it would have been something I would have seriously considered, bringing them back either as the developmental or bringing Ring of Honor as the second brand, so we'd have Impact Wrestling and Ring of Honor Wrestling, and then using Evolve as a development company and actually setting that up as a development company, because you'll see as I go through the roster, there's a lot of people on this show who, to be fair, I don't want on the roster, but I don't want to fire or release them. So for example, I was bringing these 2 guys, Pac and Fergal Devitt and Lindsay Kay, to be fair, in on short-term deals, and then Dixie Carter stepped in and extended their contracts, so it was kind of out of my hand. Again, we've got people on the roster like Abyss, who would have only been there for a short period, but we'll look now on our main event stars, or major stars as they are now called in the game. Bryan Danielson, absolutely brilliant the job that we did with him. I think he's always been protected very strongly, and we'll look at his win-loss record in the company throughout the years. He only lost 9 matches, and I'd be surprised if more than 3 and 4 of them were him getting pinned. It's either the ladder matches, as we've seen, the CM Punk one and the El Generico and Kevin Steen one, triple threats. In fact, I'm not going to talk through it, but I'm going to actually count up how many matches that I believe that Bryan Danielson was pinned in. And if I'm not mistaken, the only pinfall defeat that Bryan Danielson ever had was Slammiversary 2011, where it was the triple threat match where Bobby Lashley had been eliminated by Bryan Danielson, and then Kurt Angle eliminated Bryan himself. So arguably the most protected guy in the entire save. I thought that Kurt Angle was, and of course CM Punk less so this year. 4 wins and 4 losses. He came in really well, and basically he's been pushed as the main star of the show, but a 10-6 record isn't all that good for CM Punk against somebody who I don't think he had a defeat where he wasn't somewhat protected or there was some sort of shenanigans. But quite surprising to see that his appearance as the saviour and trying to destroy TNA was absolutely fantastic, and to be fair, he got his way. The voice of the voiceless, only an adequate gimmick, but it never held him back too much. Davey Richards, we spoke about previously, won Independent Wrestler of the Year 2011 while signed to Impact Wrestling, so that was pretty impressive by him. Jeff Hardy, another absolute star. We kept him obviously associated with Sting throughout the save, and I think again another guy with a really good win-loss record and just insanely popular. You can do what you want with Jeff Hardy. There's never going to be a situation where he's coming out and not getting cheered, I don't think. Kurt Angle with another fantastic record. He wrestled a fair few matches to say he missed the vast majority of the year, and somebody else who's probably, you can count on one hand the amount of defeats that he's taken, and even fewer the clean ones that he has. I'd say possibly only losing to Brock Lesnar and Bryan Danielson are his clean defeats. CM Punk maybe, but that was an unsanctioned match, so that of course doesn't count. And Paul Heyman, a major star, never quite got in the ring. We only ever had him physically attacked twice during the course of the save, which, considering how annoying of a character he was, is pretty impressive. but the first time was Bobby Lashley punching him in the face and giving him a black eye, albeit off screen, and then Jeff Hardy trying to build some hype towards that last pay-per-view. We gave Jeff Hardy the opportunity to hit a twist of fate to the man in charge. AJ Styles only down at star level. Now, I think he spent most of the save as a major star, but you can see his 50-50 record in 2012 isn't fantastic, but he did have a good record throughout the save and was somebody who, despite having a couple of peaks and troughs, we definitely made him the guy who you felt most identified with in the company. He defended TNA as the ship sank, and then he was the guy who won this gauntlet for the gold, and that was going to be the start of a renewed push for him. And I do think that I would have wanted him to be the one to end Brock Lesnar's reign eventually. Now, he won the title match at Slammiversary, so he would have gone on to lose the match against Brock Lesnar initially, but that would have been again about spiraling into the psychology of AJ Styles, moving further into that darker character that he did develop not too far from this time in real life, and then the grittier, more ruthless AJ Styles would have been the one to end Brock Lesnar's reign. I think it may have been at Slammiversary 2013, or maybe even Bound for Glory 2013, but I think that out of everybody on the roster, I'd be happy to hear what other people think, but for me, that would have been the guy to take the belt. Austin Aries, somebody else who I think I could have done more with and would have done more with after the New Age of Honor officially breaking up. He would have then gone on to be a single star, and I think I would have probably tried to make him the star of the second brand before eventually bringing him back onto Impact as a top level name. But I think him having something to prove, a chip on his shoulder, is always a good position to have the Austin Aries character in. Brock Lesnar only a star, and we did have to do some work to even get him to this point. Yeah, so you can see there in the last year, because of inactivity, he went down as low as 75, so we've done pretty well to get him back up to 81, and I think in no time he would have been back towards that 83 level. But somebody who should by rights be on the major star screen. And I'm quite surprised, because I think I must have a filter on here actually, because I definitely know that, but yeah, I've got males on. And where's Sting? It's a little bit concerning that I don't think there's any women on the major stars screen, but I know that Awesome Kong should be. So yeah, there we are, Awesome Kong. Somebody, you talk about protecting somebody, a absolutely brilliant record for her. She's involved in 12 defeats, but again, one or two of them will have been actual pinfall defeats. I know she lost to Sarah Del Rey clean. I know she lost to Madison Rayne in very, very controversial circumstances. The others will have been multi-people matches like the Battle Royal at the end of 2011, other things like that. Chris Hero in a star bracket, and I would have expected that he would have been one of the major stars eventually. Somebody else, if you look at the win-loss records here, we protected a lot of people on the roster, to be fair, and I don't think it ever hurt us in the sense that we had too much of a segregation between these are the guys who win and these are the guys who lose. I always felt that there was progression within the card and stuff like that, so definitely not complaining there. Again, Desmond Wolfe, he had his fair share of losses when he was a heel, but since turning face, we pushed him very, very strongly. He became one of the Impact World Tag Team Champions, of course, and the first ever Evolve Champion. Eddie Edwards with the outside threat gimmick, somewhat outdated there, but another one who has a very, very good win-loss record and deserves to be in the top position there. And I really do feel like this is AJ Styles, even because he'd been booked a little bit lower down the card in 2012. It's fair that he's here. The only one that I'd say is I'd like to see Davey Richards down a tier and Brock Lesnar up a tier. But other than that, I feel like this is a really, really accurate representation of how we book people. I don't want to look too much into... Yeah, so he's still got a decent record, but not as good. The worst win-loss record that we've seen, I think. But again, he's been a heel for a lot of the save, so that does definitely play into a factor. A decent record for Shelton Benjamin, but somebody who now as a single star would have definitely gone on to fantastic things. But I do think we have an absolutely fantastic star-studded roster put together there. I really don't even want to face the fact that I've knocked Sting down to a well-known. That is absolute booking malpractice by me. We would have got him back up there, I'm sure. Alex Shelley, a really, really important member of the roster throughout the save, and somebody who, again, could we have done more with the Motor City Machine Guns when they weren't going for tag team titles? I think that we kind of had them involved in championship discussion for a long time. They had 18 tag team title matches, including their time as champions, but I think maybe in fleshing out the tag team division, we could have maybe, it's hard to have personal rivalries between tag teams, I find, or have too many of them without going completely off track. Another guy with a great record there is Charlie Haas. I'm surprised by quite how good his record is, actually. Of course, we buffed it up massively in 2012, but that's why he is up there on the well-known level and with white-hot momentum. So again, somebody whose push I wasn't quite sure we'd done a good job of. I felt like there was, I don't know, I was pushing him, but everything seems to be going against me. He was off his game a lot, and his stamina is absolutely shocking. He could barely go 10-minute matches without having certain road agent notes in there to mitigate the fact that he would be getting exhausted. So I tried my best to book him, but he kind of only had himself to blame. An awful gimmick as well, so there was a lot of things working against us, namely his in-ring performances, his lack of promo ability. I'm not going to completely go in on the guy because, again, I think the way he was booked and the ideas I had in my head didn't quite translate into the game, but I do think that he had a good run in the company. Chris Sabin, another guy, I can't really say anything that I've not said about Alex Shelley because they were joined at the hip. I do think actually the Motor City Machine Guns was their legs in a potential heel turn down the line. Now, I just think they're such likeable guys. They have such an exciting in-ring style. People want to cheer the Motor City Machine Guns. Of course, they are good at playing arrogant little pricks, but I kind of feel like if you're trying to force people to boo people, then it doesn't quite work. So Charlie Haas, who can work the more slow-paced style, he makes sense as a heel for me. Whereas the guys like Motor City Machine Guns, it was hard to ever turn them heel. Again, Samoa Joe is somebody who's fantastic in the ring, but he can work the heel style, certainly. Whereas AJ Styles, I never really felt like I wanted to book him as a heel, and then he's doing all these fantastic flips in the ring, and you're supposed to boo him. Another guy who we built up pretty well, not quite as high up as I'd like to have seen him. I mean, well known is a decent spot for him, but I think in terms of overness, look at his record in 2011, absolutely incredible. Sorry, 2012, but his record throughout, he was very much more losses than wins, and he's somebody who, again, he's so popular, such a good character, but he's somebody who you can afford to have lose quite a lot, so that probably hurt him in the short term. Gail Kim, a well-known, I would have liked to have seen at least one more woman in the star category, and I think eventually we would have got there in time, but she was very, very far from being over when we brought her in, so it was a job of us trying to bring her up and build her up as a star. James Storm, well known in spite of my booking, to be fair, and I'll say the same for him and Robert Roode. In reality, they were absolutely bona fide main eventers by this stage in the company. It was one of the best storylines in TNA history for me. It didn't always go the way that I would have liked it to. I wanted James Storm to win that match in Lockdown 2011 so badly, or was it Lockdown 2012? I don't quite remember. But in terms of their chemistry in the ring and the way it elevated them to top level stars, he's basically a mid-card guy here, and that's just not good enough. It's one of them where you bring in the shiny new toys, Tyler, the Kings of Wrestling, all those other people, and actually the people who you had there who the fans loved kind of get pushed to the wayside. So I feel like there was legs in. I'll tell my idea for the story was that Christopher Daniels and Frankie Zeri would turn on their money at some point. I don't know if it was too early yet to do it, but at some point that would have happened. And then I think it would have had Robert Roode turn, and then he could have been his egomaniac character, James Storm built as a face. But it was one of them, again, I could have done the storyline, but it would have been worse than what they did in reality because that was for the World Heavyweight Championship, and this wouldn't have been. I don't think I would have ever seen them as main event stars during the course of my save, and it's a shame that there's not a bit more competition from the outside world because the people who I didn't book so well, I would have liked there to be a bit more, like, he's happy. Why would James Storms be happy after the 2 years that he's had? He should be looking elsewhere, and I feel like that's something that's a little bit missing. It never felt like a challenge to keep hold of people. WWE would have been sniffing all over people as this company went from medium size to big size, was putting on all these fantastic shows. Unfortunately, that side of the game doesn't happen, but I probably would have been kicking off about losing people. So we have the Briscoes as well in the well-known category, I believe. Oh no, Mark must only be recognisable, but I'll say the same thing for him. Just came in too late in a way. I would have done a lot more with them. We were getting them over as characters. They would have been going into a storyline with Team 3D, a short one that maybe would have ended at Victory Road pay-per-view, or maybe we would have used it as a Impact Wrestling main event to try and get as many eyes on a big win for Jay Briscoe and Mark Briscoe. A little bit of a passing of the torch in terms of a hardcore brawling style team, and that would have then led to Jay and Mark Briscoe 100% being future Impact World Tag Team Champions. Somebody who I flip-flopped on throughout the save. You will look at his win-loss record and probably see that. I mean, 2010, he was literally the definition of mid-card. 2012, he won 12 and didn't win 11, so he's pretty much got a 50% win. I think has he got literally a 50% win-loss record? Not quite, but it's about as close as you'll find to a 50% win-loss record in the company. Just a few draws in there, knocking it a little bit off. But again, mid-card, he went to be a Ring of Honor main eventer, but he's not better than the people who are in the main event positions now. He was a decent heel. I think we could have had him as a face again in the future, and again somebody who would have benefited from a future brand split. And I've got so many ideas in my head that I think it's a real shame that it's over, but it was the time to call it. Kevin Steen's somebody else who I always looked to protect throughout the save. He had a really, really good record in Impact Wrestling, I think, and his X Division Championship run I really, really loved. My second choice to be the first, Evolve Champion as well, and I just love that he came in on the first episode of TNA Evolve, and it was when we just bought out Ring of Honor. Kevin Steen was somebody I'd probably planned to sign further down the line, but I thought we bought this company and we've got Kevin Steen on our roster, and he'd been written out of Ring of Honor on the last show, the final battle that I booked, so it all seemed to come into play. And Kevin Steen, Kevin Owens, of course, absolutely incredible, no doubt about that. I do believe at one point Mickie James may have been in the star category as well. She had a tough 2011, by which we mean she had a pretty dismal or even record, but somebody who we booked strongly, and she was always going to be a key part of this division. It's Mickie James in it. She's always popular, no matter where she was or how she was positioned. She was always a top star from the moment she came into WWE and all the way to June 2012. She won Wrestler of the Year in 2009. Paul London, we kind of played off as a veteran gimmick despite him only being 32 years old, but that was based off the way basically him and Brian Kendrick were in interviews around this time. They had a bit of a chip on their shoulder. They weren't happy with their WWE booking. And how was his booking here? Before I say too much, I will look. Very, very average. Half of his matches lost, 32 wins and 1 draw. But I always felt that he was treated with irreverence. I think a future X Division champion, maybe. I think that would have been really cool. He was also one of my choices, if he'd not been in the King of the Mountain ladder match, to beat D'Angelo Dinero and have a little bit of a run with a belt, but that never came to fruition. Bobby Roode, again, I've said what I needed to say around James Storm. Roderick Strong, someone who I've never really liked too much in reality, but who in this universe I just kind of liked the way we were building him up. A young guy, yeah, he's never going to have the most charisma or microphone skills, but he got over just purely on being a fantastic wrestler. We had him as Kurt Angle's protege throughout the save, and again, just somebody who had really, really good memories of him in the company. But yeah, again, a middling win-loss record, but for such a young guy, I think he really did establish himself on the roster. Sarah Del Rey, somebody who has that kind of thing of when she first came in, she was considered unbeatable, and then she went more into a gatekeeper role. I say that's again one of the best. 49 wins, 1 draw and 11 losses, and I think that's absolutely fair because she was absolutely brilliant throughout this save for us. Alyssa Flash not quite making it into well known, but she was kind of like Sarah Del Rey light throughout this save. I'm not even going to address that. And Tyler Black only down in well known. Bloody hell, I didn't realise that defeat to Brody Lee probably was the main thing that caused that. He's been booked really well though, I think. I'm pretty sure his win-loss record is... It's not bad, is it? 2 times as many wins as losses, so his ratings were always good, so I'm not going to complain too much. I'm just surprised to see him down there, and he's annoyed with something. I don't know what I've booked to upset him. I gave him a massive bonus in 2011, and he's still mad about the booking of a match from over almost a year ago, so yeah, whatever, Tyler. No, but he would have been one of the top stars in the company. He's absolutely fantastic all-round game, only getting better, 26 years old, and you look at them stats, he would have gone on, as he did in reality, to become one of the biggest names in the company, just lacking that psychology, so something to develop him. He was still a young wrestler, even at the end of this save, and anybody knows pretty much, if you're watching this, you know how good Tyler Black went on to be as Seth Rollins. We then have Abyss, who is only here for a one-time thing, but he was coming back just to have a one-off match, maybe a Monsters Ball match or just a no DQ match against Brody Lee, who we were trying to establish. Of course, he left the company in 2011, I believe, his last match against D'Angelo Dinero, who he put out on the injured list, and that was pretty much the moment that I soured on him. He did have 11 months unbeaten before losing to Kurt Angle, and the only person to ever defeat him in a pinfall situation, although I think he made him tap out, didn't he? But it was a last man standing that Kurt beat him in, so again, he was protected to the point of only ever being tapped out by Bryan Danielson, but that was as we were kind of phasing him out. He had a good run though, it has to be said, and he's back for one little short program before heading off into the sunset. By 2012 he was playing the Joseph Park character, and he physically wasn't the same as he'd previously been, but that's not to say he didn't go on to have a fantastic character as Joseph Parks, and I always enjoyed that character. Adam Pearce is somebody who again was coming into the company, and he had a good start and then became a bit of a lackey for Charlie Haas, but again, he would have been somebody who we would have tried to build up as the future. I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit quicker. If there's anybody that you see on here that you'd like to see the win-loss record of, just leave a comment and I'll put a screenshot or a link to a screenshot or whatever. I will go through some, but Angelina Love, very, very stagnant as a character. She did the same thing for pretty much 2 years. Brody Lee, I was very much trying to build him up, and if you look at his popularity from where it was, I'm going to say I did a pretty good job, to be fair, and that was just by giving him big wins against big people and him being the final elimination, bringing that storyline with AJ Styles' background full circle to the end. He only ever wrestled 11 matches for us as well, so again, I think if we would have put the Evolve belt on him and then just built that show around Brody Lee being an absolute monster for a little while, that would have been really, really cool. Chris Daniels, I will look at his win-loss record just because, yeah, it's not good. That Chris Daniels, an absolute legend of TNA, an original, and probably should have been booked better. About as over as Earl Hebner. That's probably the biggest diss that I could give Frankie Kazarian and Christopher Daniels there. Frankie's probably even got, yeah, very similarly not great record. Hamada had a very, very strong record, I'd imagine. I know I said that I wouldn't go through the records, but yeah, a very, very, and 60 odd matches for an Impact. So somebody who was an ever-present. Homicide, again, a bit of a bit part player, coming back into prominence more recently, but he was never somebody who we were focusing the company around. Jim Cornette, I think his contract's got just a couple of days left here. Yeah, he literally leaves on the Tuesday after Slammiversary, and he was only brought in for that Shelton Benjamin Charlie Haas little storyline. And the thing that I had in mind for Charlie Haas after was for him to build a little bit of a stable. He would have been another guy as a heel on Evolve Wrestling, and I wanted to bring in Crimson and Gunner as his henchmen. That was a vision I had in my mind, but whether that would have happened, again, there's a lot of things that I thought of that didn't necessarily come to fruition, and I will go and try and mention a few of them. I thought that would at the time. We come to a guy who has a terrible in-ring record, but did get himself pretty over, to be fair, and was always a big part of storylines, particularly the New Age, of course. I mentioned this on a previous video, I think, but the New Age originals were Tyler Black, Claudio Castagnoli and Chris Hero. I did have a backup in mind that I'd bring Austin Aries and the American Wolves in, so it's kind of funny how that storyline ended up being brought to an end at Slammiversary, and that essentially the fake New Age lost, and they were actually my second choice to be the 10-10-10 guys. I don't think it would have worked anything like as well as it did, but there's a little tidbit of how the butterfly wings could have changed, but thankfully everything I had in mind carried on. Another couple of guys, the two Kennys, were being built up on Evolve Wrestling. Kenny Omega, again, you kind of want to let him go and do his own thing and flourish in New Japan Pro Wrestling or DDT, and he is on a handshake deal, so he could have gone and worked wherever he wanted, but again, somebody who was part of the future of the company, just like Kenny King. Kenny King, I was hoping to bring more into a prominent position in the X Division. Could he have been the guy to dethrone Shelton Benjamin? A bit of a passing of the torch there. I think he's about 10 years younger than him. So yeah, maybe or maybe not. I'm not 100% sure. Madison Rayne, only down at Recognisable, recently returned for the Slammiversary build, but a former Knockouts champion, the youngest Knockouts champion in history. Larry Sweeney, I skipped over there. Somebody who I've just loved having part of the save. He's always been towards the lower card, but he's always made everything a little bit more entertaining, involving the people he's worked with, Kazuchika Okada, Hamada, the Young Bucks, Magnus, so a few stars there who were born under the wing of Larry Sweeney, and it's good to see that he was able to have an impact on the save. Maria with Jay Lethal, again, we had her turn heel. Previously, she'd only ever been a face, so this was us giving her an opportunity to show those acting chops that she later down the line did show. Mark Briscoe, the referees I'm not going to talk about, the Young Bucks. Where's Nick Jackson? Don't tell me Nick Jackson's on unimportant. I'm going to be very shocked if Nick Jackson's considered unimportant, even though he is quite unimportant. But another couple of guys who are so young, and we probably would have, again, been on the second brand and built them up. Hopefully a future tag team champions. Pac shouldn't even be on my roster. I've not used him. He was just extended by Dixie, and I didn't want to release him in case I did want to bring him back in the future. Sarita was somebody who I was giving a push, partly because look how good she is, and I think she was a really good option for a second brand's champion. She would have then, I think, gone heel, and we would have seen a lot more from her. Sonjay Dutt came back, went for the X-Division title, never managed to get it, and we didn't do too much with him, unfortunately. Steve Corino, as we've kind of covered the New Age storyline, but I think I might have brought Ring of Honor back, with it being that Steve Corino, using his, obviously the part of the storyline that he was in where there was minority owners of Ring of Honor and all that, so we would have tried to maybe have that as the way that the loophole that he brings Ring of Honor back, but I do feel like because we'd used it in the storyline, may have dragged the brand through the mud a little bit, so it's probably better to just start fresh, Impact Wrestling, Evolve Wrestling, but I think he would have had an authority figure gimmick further down the line, and we would have probably took a little bit of the heelishness away from him. But for the time being, he would have been Brody Lee's manager, potentially moving away from that, because in my mind, Austin Aries with Brody Lee as his heater, but not worth my time to go too much further into that. Tara was somebody who I really think I've enjoyed how she's been booked, a kind of deranged character, but always a huge part and always involved in storylines. There was never a time throughout the 2.5 years where we didn't have something for Tara. I really loved the booking of her getting another title shot, mainly because she had announced her retirement in the game and I convinced her to not retire, so I thought that it was a little bit of a way to thank her for continuing by giving her the belt at Bound for Glory, putting her career on the line, and I kind of teased that she'd told us that she was retiring. I showed that on screen. We managed to convince her, and she had a great run before passing the torch to Gail Kim. Really happy with how the Knockouts division has been booked. It probably didn't get up there so much in terms of the ratings that I might have hoped, but nonetheless, I am happy with how things went. Nick Jackson is in Unimportant. I'm disappointed with that, as is Amazing Red. I don't want to look at this list of people now, but it's probably fair for the vast majority of them. I don't think Amazing Red is unimportant, although he did come in and out of prominence so often that maybe that is the case. This is largely an Evolve Wrestling roster, and Velvet Sky never quite got over, because I'm going to check her win-loss record because I think it might be one of the absolute worst. Fair enough, I've underestimated Velvet Sky there. Why she never got over, I don't know. And we did bring in Serena Deeb. She made her debut on the Evolve Wrestling pre-show. Another great member of the roster, 26 years old at this time, and I think somebody who would have been fantastic in the future of the Knockouts division. And I think we had a lot more people, namely people from WWE, because in the mod we don't have too many of the future stars in this save. But I will now just look through my shortlist to see if there's anybody who we never actually signed to the company who was on my shortlist, and I think there is. So we've got Beth Phoenix, who was under contract with WWE and had another 2.5 years. She's somebody I would have liked to have brought in, because I know that she retired in real life because she wasn't that happy with the division. There are some people like Chavo Guerrero Jr. I don't know why he's on my shortlist, because there's not a chance I would have brought him in. Never been that big of a... Not that I've not been a fan of him, but I don't think that he was the type of guy we should have been signing. I kept Doug Williams on there. Dragon Kid, I think he must have just... Yeah, he's fantastically rated. He maybe would have made... He wouldn't have been a signing, let's put it that way. Dustin Rhodes, I toyed with having him in the gauntlet for the gold at Slammiversary, because he had a little bit of a bad time in TNA, didn't he? So I thought it'd be cool to, in 2012, bring him in and maybe give him a little bit of a better lasting impression of the promotion. We then see Harry Smith, who is still under contract with the WWE. James Gibson, likewise, in a few months, maybe somebody I would have been trying to steal from them. Although I say that, I don't think Jamie Noble in 2012 was somebody we would have been desperate to bring in. John Moxley, this is an interesting one, because I did have a big idea planned for John Moxley, and that would have been that we would have had Abyss taken off screen, and then when he came back as the Monster Abyss, he would have had a roommate in the asylum that he'd been in, and that would have been John Moxley. So whether they would have initially had an alliance, and then it would have turned into John Moxley attacking him and bringing this unhinged character to the promotion. I think that was one where the timing never quite lined up. I think I actually signed him. I definitely signed him at one point. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he got injured. Doesn't look like it, actually. Maybe that was just me. Yeah, there's no injury. I could have sworn he was injured at one point, and that's why I never brought him in. I don't know what happened anyway with John Moxley, but it just never felt the right time in terms of Abyss. And then by the time we'd written him out with D'Angelo De Niro, I felt that it was a little bit too late to then retread that. Maybe it's something we could have still done in the future, but I think John Moxley in real life had signed with WWE by now, so maybe not something we would have done. Katie Lee Burchill, I'm looking at these people who I was interested in stealing from WWE. At $35,000, I don't think we would have been doing so. Kenta, somebody who just for the future sort of international stuff. MVP, somebody who a contract expiring in 5 months, and he went on to have an interesting career outside of the WWE, so he could have been a cool signing. Melina Perez, 41 days. Definitely would have been on the radar. Mystico, Nick Aldis, who left, of course. Phil Shatter, and what's he called in this? Tommy Mercer, is it? Yeah, those would have been two guys who we would have brought in for certain on the Evolve show and built them up just as sort of henchmen before they established, because they weren't great wrestlers, but I did think that when you saw them on TNA around this time, they definitely had a look and they definitely had a star quality that I think they could have been useful for us. I'm just going to check my notes now before I finish this video to see if there's anything that I did want to say that I've not quite remembered. And I don't think there is. I'm just trying to think of other ideas that never quite came to fruition during the save, signings that I didn't quite make, but I think the only ones that particularly come to mind are the John Moxley one and the New Age potentially being very, very different. Oh, Bobby Lashley was going to win the belt before he was signed away from the company. Some of my favourite moments as well. Mick Foley was signed away from the company by WWE because I wasn't going to give him $100,000 a month. Him with the New Age, that really odd fit of the old school veteran, but somebody who always looked forward, so I felt like it would have been cool. Mick Foley trying to stay trendy and hip with those guys, and we were always going to have, eventually they turned on him for the heel heat of them beating up a legend who, even as a heel, everybody would have loved, but he also played that sycophantic character so well when he did it with Edge, so I thought that would have been a fun dynamic to do more with, but actually the way the New Age went, I wouldn't change anything in retrospect. So there it is, the end of the series, the end of this save. It will be available in some form. You'll be able to find it. Look in the description or the comments or whatever, it's likely to be there. We'll look through the situation in WWE just as I sign off here, just to see where this company was, because of course they don't have some of the guys who went on to become their biggest stars around this time and in the future. So Bryan Danielson, Seth Rollins, even guys like Cesaro, CM Punk, Brock Lesnar, all missing, but we can see Undertaker's still there, Edge, Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin, Bret Hart. So they've got a lot of star quality, but then you see there's a big drop off. Again, this wasn't the best time for WWE in reality. I think CM Punk was just about the only thing keeping me interested in WWE around this time. So certainly something. Kalen Croft is their NXT champion, albeit known as the Florida Heavyweight. So this timeline has not been kind to the WWE. It's not been kind to a lot of promotions, to be fair, because you will see there are barely any companies left. Jakara, CZW, Dragon Gate, Evolve, that was my fault, Ring of Honor, Shimmer, lots and lots of promotions going out of business, perhaps because of the aggressive expansion of Impact Wrestling, who knows, but it's basically us and Shine, I think, who are outside the WWE in the US at this point. PWG going strong with a lot of our guys, to be fair, but there it is, the end of the series. Thank you for everybody who's watched, and hopefully I've not missed anything too major that people would have been interested in. Let me know if there is anything, and I'll try through screenshots or however I can to let you know. And of course you will be able to check this out yourself. The database will be there, the save will be there, and if I do ever get the itch to play a few more months, I might try and do a recap video of what I've done. Chances are that I will now be moving on to TEW9. Anybody who subscribed, liked, commented, whatever, thank you so much, and I'll see you whenever it is that the next video comes. Thank you.